August 14th, 2001, Willow Creek, Georgia. The evening air hung thick and sweet, heavy with the scent of magnolia blossoms and freshly cut grass. Amber Whitlow pushed open the double doors of First Baptist Church, her choir folder tucked under one arm, humming the last notes of Amazing Grace as she stepped into the fading light. The sun had dipped below the pines, leaving the sky bruised purple and orange, the kind of twilight that made everything look softer than it really was. She was 17, a junior at Willow Creek High, brown hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, freckles across her nose, wearing the same denim skirt and white blouse she'd worn to school that morning. Her bicycle leaned against the brick wall of the church, right where she'd left it 2 hours earlier, the basket on the handlebars still holding her water bottle and a dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Reverend Thomas Hale stood in the doorway behind her, silhouetted against the warm glow of the sanctuary. He was a tall man, mid-50s, with silver hair combed neatly to the side and a voice that could fill the entire church without a microphone. He'd been the pastor at First Baptist for nearly 20 years, baptizing babies, marrying couples, burying the dead. Everyone in Willow Creek knew him. Everyone trusted him. "You sure you don't want to ride home, Amber?" he called out, his tone gentle, fatherly. "It's getting dark." She turned and waved him off with a smile. "I'm fine, Reverend Hale. It's only a mile. Mama's expecting me by 8. He nodded slowly, watching her as she climbed onto her bike and pedaled down the gravel driveway toward the main road. The church sat on the edge of town, surrounded by old oak trees draped in Spanish moss, their branches swaying gently in the humid breeze. Beyond the church lay the Willow Creek Cemetery, rows of weathered headstones half hidden by overgrown grass and wildflowers. Amber turned left onto Pinewood Road, her tires crunching over loose gravel. The streetlights hadn't come on yet. The road stretched ahead of her, narrow and winding, flanked on both sides by thick woods that seemed to close in as the light faded. She could hear cicadas thrumming in the trees, a rhythmic pulse that filled the silence. She passed the Johnsons' farm, where a single yellow light glowed in the kitchen window, then the old Miller place, abandoned for years, its porch sagging and windows boarded up. The air smelled like pine sap and distant rain, the kind of storm that rolls in slow and stays all night. But Amber never made it home. By 9 o'clock, Lydia Whitlow was standing on the front porch of their small white house on Oak Ridge Lane, arms crossed, eyes scanning the empty street. The porch light cast a pale circle on the wooden steps. Moths fluttered around the bulb. Inside, the television murmured softly, some sitcom laugh track that no one was watching. Lydia was a thin woman, 43 years old, with the kind of worry lines that come from raising a daughter alone. Amber's father had left when she was 3, moved to Atlanta and never looked back. It had been just the two of them ever since, living in the house Lydia had inherited from her parents, scraping by on her job as a secretary at the county clerk's office. She called Amber's best friend, Sarah Mitchell. No answer. She called the church. No answer. By 10 o'clock, she called the sheriff's office. Deputy Earl Granger arrived 20 minutes later, a stocky man in his late 30s with a crew cut and a tired expression. He took notes while Lydia stood in the doorway, wringing her hands, her voice shaking. "She always comes home on time," Lydia said. "Always. She's a good girl. She wouldn't just disappear." Granger nodded, scribbling in his notepad. "Did she say anything before she left? Was she upset about something?" Lydia hesitated. We had a disagreement this morning. Nothing serious. Just about college applications. She wants to go to the University of Georgia, and I told her we couldn't afford it. But she wasn't angry. She hugged me before she left for school." Granger promised to drive the route between the church and the house, check the usual spots where kids hung out. He told Lydia not to worry, said most missing teenager cases resolved themselves within 24 hours. Runaways, sleepovers gone late, miscommunications. But by dawn, there was still no sign of Amber. At 6:47 a.m. On August 15th, a groundskeeper at Willow Creek Cemetery found her bicycle leaning against the wrought iron fence that bordered the church property. The kickstand was down. The basket still held her water bottle and book. Nothing appeared disturbed. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No torn fabric caught on the fence. Just the bike, standing perfectly still in the morning mist, as if Amber had simply stepped away for a moment and never came back. The discovery sent a shockwave through the small town. By noon, volunteers had organized search parties, combing the woods along Pinewood Road, calling Amber's name until their voices went hoarse. The local radio station broadcast her description every hour. Flyers with her school photo appeared on every telephone pole, storefront window, and church bulletin board. Sheriff Raymond Polk held a press conference on the courthouse steps, flanked by Deputy Granger and Lydia Whitlow, who stood pale and trembling, clutching a tissue in one hand. The sheriff was a heavy-set man, with a grey mustache and a reputation for being tough but fair. He spoke slowly, deliberately, promising that every resource would be dedicated to finding Amber. But as the days turned into weeks, the leads dried up. No witnesses, no ransom demands, no body. The FBI sent agents down from Atlanta, interviewed dozens of people, searched abandoned buildings, dragged the creek that ran behind the church. They found nothing. Reverend Hale was questioned multiple times. He told the same story each time. Amber had left the church around 7:15 p.m., seemed in good spirits, declined his offer of a ride home. He'd watched her pedal away, then locked up the church and went home to his wife, Margaret. She confirmed his alibi. They'd eaten dinner together, watched the news, gone to bed around 10. Lydia was questioned too. She told investigators about the argument, about Amber's frustration over college, but insisted it was nothing serious. They'd had disagreements before. Amber always came back, always, but this time she hadn't. By October, the investigation had stalled. The FBI agents returned to Atlanta. The search parties stopped. The flyers faded in the sun and rain. Amber's smiling face bleached to a ghost of itself. Willow Creek returned to its quiet rhythms, though the town felt different now, as if something essential had been broken. Lydia kept Amber's room exactly as it had been the day she disappeared. Bed made with the quilt her grandmother had sewn, perfume bottles lined up on the dresser, a poster of Destiny's Child on the wall, clothes still hanging in the closet, books stacked on the nightstand. She went to church every Sunday, sat in the same pew, sang the same hymns. Reverend Hale always made a point to speak with her after the service, to offer comfort, to remind her that God had not forgotten Amber. And over time, the town learned to live with the unanswered question. Amber Whitlow became a story people told in hushed tones, a warning to lock your doors, to watch your children, to never take safety for granted. But no one spoke about what might have really happened that night. Not yet. The first year after Amber's disappearance, Lydia Whitlow aged a decade. Her brown hair turned streaked with grey. The lines around her mouth deepened. She stopped wearing makeup, stopped ironing her clothes, stopped answering the phone unless it was the sheriff's office. Every morning, she woke at 5:30, Tomato made coffee. She didn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair where Amber used to eat her cereal and complain about homework. The house on Oak Ridge Lane became a mausoleum. Neighbors stopped visiting. The casseroles and sympathy cards stopped coming. People didn't know what to say anymore. How do you comfort a mother whose daughter vanished into thin air? Lydia returned to work at the county clerk's office 6 weeks after Amber disappeared. She needed the money. The bills didn't stop just because her world had ended, but she moved through her days like a ghost, filing papers, answering phones, speaking only when necessary. Her co-workers learned not to ask how she was doing. At night, she lay awake in the dark, listening to the house creak and settle, wondering if Amber was out there somewhere, scared, hurt, calling for her, or if she was already gone, buried in some forgotten place, her bones turning to dust beneath the Georgia clay. Sheriff Polk kept the case open, but with no new leads, there was little he could do. He assigned Deputy Granger to follow up on the occasional tip that came in. Someone thought they'd seen a girl matching Amber's description at a truck stop in South Carolina, or hitchhiking on I-75, or working at a diner in Tennessee, but every lead turned out to be nothing. Wrong girl, mistaken identity, wishful thinking. The FBI officially closed their investigation in March 2002, citing lack of evidence. The case was transferred back to the Willow Creek Sheriff's Department, where it joined the other unsolved files in a metal cabinet in the back office. By the second year, the town had mostly moved on. People still thought about Amber, of course. Her name still came up in conversations, usually late at night, when the subject of unsolved mysteries arose. But life continued. High school students graduated. Babies were born. The cotton fields around Willow Creek bloomed and were harvested. The seasons turned. Sarah Mitchell, Amber's best friend, left for college in the fall of 2002. She couldn't stand being in Willow Creek anymore, couldn't walk past the church or the cemetery without feeling sick. She studied psychology at Georgia State, got married, moved to Savannah, and rarely came back to visit. Reverend Hale continued to lead the congregation at First Baptist, though attendance had dropped slightly. Some families quietly switched to other churches, uncomfortable with the association. Even though no one believed Hale had anything to do with Amber's disappearance, he was a good man, a man of God. He'd done everything he could to help. Margaret Hale, the Reverend's wife, noticed the change in her husband. He'd always been a man of routine, morning prayers, hospital visits, sermon preparation, but after Amber vanished, he became withdrawn, distant. He spent hours in his study with the door closed, claiming he was working on sermons, but she sometimes heard him weeping softly on the other side. When she asked him what was wrong, he'd smile tightly and say, "Just the weight of the world, Margaret. Just the weight of the world." In 2005, Sheriff Polk retired. He handed the badge over to his deputy, Earl Granger, who became the new sheriff at the age of 42. One of Granger's first acts was to go through the cold case files, including Amber's. He reviewed the witness statements, the search reports, the FBI's analysis. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Amber Whitlow had simply vanished. Granger visited Lydia one afternoon in late summer, sitting with her on the front porch while the cicadas droned in the trees. She looked smaller than he remembered, her shoulders hunched, her hands trembling as she poured iced tea into mismatched glasses. "I'm not giving up," Granger told her. "I know it's been 4 years, but I'm not giving up." Lydia nodded slowly, her eyes distant. "She's gone, Earl. I know she is. I can feel it. I just want to know what happened. I want to bring her home." But the years continued to pass and no answers came. By 2010, Amber Whitlow was becoming a footnote in Willow Creek's history. The younger generation didn't remember her. The flyers had long since disappeared. The bench dedicated to her memory at the high school was covered in moss and bird droppings. Lydia Whitlow turned 50, then 55. She stopped going to church. She stopped leaving the house except for work and groceries. She became a recluse, a figure people pointed out in whispers when she shuffled through the aisles at the Piggly Wiggly, her cart half empty, her eyes hollow. Reverend Hale retired in 2018, handing the pulpit over to a younger pastor, a man in his 30s with a wife and 2 young children. The congregation threw Hale a retirement party, gave him a gold watch and a plaque thanking him for 37 years of service. He smiled and shook hands and gave a short speech about faith and perseverance. But those who knew him well could see the exhaustion in his face. He and Margaret moved to a small house on the outskirts of town, near the edge of the woods. He spent his days reading, gardening, and taking long walks. He rarely spoke about his years at the church. When asked, he'd simply say, "I did my best. That's all any of us can do." In the spring of 2020, Sheriff Granger suffered a heart attack and retired early. The new sheriff, a woman named Angela Torres from Savannah, took over the department. She was younger, more tech-savvy, eager to modernize the office. She digitized old case files, started a social media presence for the department, and reopened several cold cases, including Amber Whitlow's, but there was still nothing new to find. By 2024, Lydia Whitlow was 66 years old. Her health was failing. She'd been diagnosed with early-stage dementia, though she refused to move into assisted living. She stayed in the house on Oak Ridge Lane, alone, her mind slipping a little more each day. She still kept Amber's room untouched, still left the porch light on every night, just in case. And then, in the spring of 2025, the rains came. Georgia had always been prone to flooding, but the storm that hit in early March was worse than usual. The creeks overflowed, roads washed out, basements flooded across the county. Willow Creek was hit hard, with several homes along the river sustaining significant water damage. The old Whitlow house, built in the 1940s, had a basement that hadn't been used in years. When the floodwaters rose, they seeped through the foundation, filling the basement with 2 feet of muddy water. When the storm finally passed, the county sent crews to help residents clean up. One of those crews was a disaster relief team from Atlanta, contracted to assess structural damage and pump out flooded basements. On March 18, 2025, 2 workers descended into the basement of the Whitlow house to assess the damage. What they found would change everything. Behind a section of water-damaged drywall, loosened by the flood, they discovered a sealed cavity in the foundation. Inside was a rusted metal locket on a tarnished chain, the kind a teenage girl might wear, and next to it, wrapped in a rotting canvas tarp, were human remains, skeletal, small, female. The workers immediately called 911. Within an hour, the house was swarming with police, forensic techs, and investigators. Sheriff Torres stood in the front yard, her arms crossed, watching as the remains were carefully extracted from the basement and loaded into the coroner's van. Lydia Whitlow was not home. She was at the hospital for a routine checkup. When Torres arrived to tell her what they'd found, Lydia simply stared at the sheriff for a long moment, her face expressionless. Then she nodded once and said, "I know." The DNA results came back 3 days later. The remains were confirmed to be those of Amber Marie Whitlow, aged 17 at the time of death. She had been deceased for approximately 24 years. Amber had never left Willow Creek. She had never even left her own house. The discovery shattered whatever fragile peace Willow Creek had built over the past 2 decades. By the time the local news stations picked up the story, the Whitlow house was surrounded by satellite trucks and reporters shouting questions at anyone who walked by. The headline scrolled across every TV screen in the county: "Human remains found in Willow Creek home. Cold case reopened." Sheriff Angela Torres held a press conference on the courthouse steps, her expression grim. She confirmed that the remains had been positively identified as Amber Whitlow and that the case was now being treated as a homicide investigation. She refused to answer questions about suspects or how the remains had ended up in the basement. The investigation, she said, was ongoing. Behind the scenes, the sheriff's department was in overdrive. Forensic anthropologists from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation examined the remains, determining that Amber had suffered blunt force trauma to the back of the skull, consistent with a fall or a blow from a heavy object. There were no signs of sexual assault, no defensive wounds, no evidence of prolonged captivity. The cause of death was likely a single traumatic head injury, followed by rapid concealment. The locket found with the remains was traced back to a jewelry store in downtown Willow Creek. The owner, an elderly man named Mr. Pettigrew, confirmed that he'd sold it to Lydia Whitlow in 1998 as a birthday gift for Amber. The locket contained 2 tiny photos, one of Lydia, one of Amber as a child. The tarp wrapping the remains was analyzed and found to be a heavy-duty canvas drop cloth, the kind used by painters and contractors. Traces of dried paint on the fabric matched samples taken from the Whitlow basement piece, which had been partially renovated in the late 1990s. But the most damning piece of evidence was the location itself. The cavity in the foundation was not accidental. Someone had deliberately broken through the concrete, created a space large enough to hold a body, placed Amber inside, and then sealed the wall with fresh drywall and joint compound. It was crude work, done in haste but effective. The wall had been painted over, covered by old furniture and storage boxes. No one had any reason to look behind it. Until the flood, Detective Jonas Mercer, a seasoned investigator brought in from the state police to assist with the case, stood in the basement with a flashlight, studying the sealed cavity. He was a tall, lean man in his early 50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes. He'd worked hundreds of cases over his career, but this one unsettled him in a way few others had. "Whoever did this," he said quietly to Sheriff Torres, "they had access to the house. They knew the layout. They had time to do the work without being interrupted." Torres nodded. So either it was Lydia herself or someone she trusted enough to let into her home. Mercer shone his light on the rough edges of the broken concrete. "The work is amateur. No professional would have done it this way. This was panic, desperation." They turned their attention to Lydia. She was brought in for questioning on March 22, 2025. She sat in the interrogation room at the sheriff's department, her hands folded in her lap, her face blank. She looked older than her 66 years, frail and confused, her dementia making it difficult to follow the questions. Sheriff Torres sat across from her, speaking slowly and gently. "Lydia, we need to talk about Amber. We found her remains in your basement. Do you understand what that means?" Lydia blinked slowly. "She's home now." "Yes, she is. But Lydia, we need to know how she got there. How did Amber end up in the basement?" Lydia's eyes drifted to the window, where the afternoon sun filtered through the blinds. "I couldn't let her leave." Torres leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "She wanted to leave. She wanted to go to college. She wanted to leave me all alone." Lydia's voice was distant, detached, as if she were describing something that had happened to someone else. "But I couldn't let her. Not after everything." Detective Mercer entered the room, his notebook in hand. "Lydia, what happened the night Amber disappeared?" For a long moment, Lydia said nothing. Then, slowly, she began to speak. "She came home from church. She was upset. We started arguing again, about college and about money. She said I was holding her back. She said she hated living here, hated this town, hated... Lydia's voice cracked. Hated me. Torres and Mercer exchanged a glance. She said she was leaving. She was going to pack her things and go stay with Sarah's family until she could figure out how to get to Atlanta. I tried to stop her. I grabbed her arm. She pulled away. She was yelling at me, saying terrible things, and Lydia's hands began to tremble. I pushed her. I didn't mean to. I just wanted her to stop yelling, but she stumbled backward, down the basement stairs. I heard her fall. I heard the sound her head made when it hit the concrete. The room was silent. I ran down the stairs. She was lying at the bottom, not moving. There was blood, so much blood. I tried to wake her up, but she wouldn't open her eyes. I called her name, but she didn't answer. Lydia looked up, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't call for help. They would have taken her away from me. They would have said I killed her. So I hid her. I broke open the wall and I put her inside and I sealed it up. And then I called the sheriff and told them she never came home. Torres felt her stomach turn. And the bicycle. I rode it to the cemetery that night. Left it by the fence. Made it look like she'd been taken. Mercer wrote quickly in his notebook. Lydia, who else knew about this? Did anyone help you? Lydia hesitated. Her expression shifted, something flickering behind her eyes. I couldn't do it alone. The wall, the concrete. I didn't know how. Who helped you? Torres pressed. Lydia's lips trembled. He said he was protecting me. He said God would forgive us. Torres's pulse quickened. Who? Lydia. Who helped you? Lydia closed her eyes. Thomas Reverend Hale. I called him that night and he came. He helped me hide her. He said it was the only way to keep me out of prison. He said we'd carry the secret together, and God would understand. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Detective Mercer stood abruptly. We need to bring him in. Now. Reverend Thomas Hale was arrested on March 23, 2025, at his home on the edge of town. He didn't resist. When Sheriff Torres and Detective Mercer arrived with a warrant, he was sitting on the front porch in a rocking chair, a Bible open in his lap, as if he'd been waiting for them. Margaret Hale stood in the doorway, her face pale, her hands clutched to her chest. Thomas, what's happening? He looked at her with sad, tired eyes. It's time, Margaret. It's finally time. They took him to the station, and he sat in the same interrogation room where Lydia had confessed the day before. He looked smaller now, older, his silver hair uncombed, his hands folded on the table in front of him. Detective Mercer sat across from him, his voice calm but firm. Reverend Hale, Lydia Whitlow has told us that you helped her conceal Amber's body in 2001. Is that true? Hale was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Yes. Torres leaned forward. Why? Why would you do that? Hale closed his eyes, as if the weight of the question was too much to bear. Because she called me. It was after midnight. She was hysterical, sobbing, saying Amber was dead, saying it was an accident, saying she didn't know what to do. I went to the house. I found Amber at the bottom of the basement stairs. Lydia was sitting beside her, covered in blood, rocking back and forth. He paused, his voice breaking. I checked for a pulse. There was none. Amber was gone. Mercer's jaw tightened. So you helped hide the body, instead of calling the police. I thought I was saving Lydia, Hale said quietly. She was a member of my congregation, a single mother who'd lost everything. If the police had come, they would have arrested her. She would have gone to prison. And for what? For an accident. Torres shook her head in disbelief. It wasn't your decision to make. I know that now, Hale said, his voice hollow. I've known it for 24 years. But in that moment, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was showing mercy. Mercy. Mercer's voice was cold. You let an entire town search for a girl you knew was dead. You let her mother pretend she was missing, knowing she was buried in the basement. You comforted that woman every Sunday, knowing what you'd done. Hale's hands trembled. I thought I was protecting her. I thought if we kept the secret, Lydia could go on living, but the secret consumed us both. Every day, I thought about confessing. Every sermon I gave, every prayer I spoke, I felt the weight of it, but I couldn't. I couldn't destroy her. Torres leaned in. Did anyone else know? Hale shook his head. No one. Just Lydia and me. Over the next several days, the full story emerged in fragments. On the night of August 14, 2001, Amber had returned home from church around 7:45 p.m. Not long after leaving, She and Lydia had resumed their argument from that morning, this time more heated. Amber had threatened to leave, to run away to Atlanta, to never speak to her mother again. In a moment of desperation, Lydia had grabbed her arm to stop her from going upstairs to pack. Amber had wrenched free and stumbled backward toward the open basement door. She'd lost her balance and fallen, striking her head on the concrete floor at the bottom of the stairs. Lydia had panicked. She'd tried to revive her daughter, but Amber was already gone. Terrified of being arrested, of losing everything, Lydia had called the one person she thought she could trust, Reverend Hale. Hale had arrived within 20 minutes. He'd assessed the situation and made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Together, he and Lydia had carried Amber's body into the far corner of the basement. Using a sledgehammer and a chisel, they'd broken through the concrete foundation, creating a crude cavity. They'd wrapped Amber in a canvas tarp, placed her inside along with the locket she'd been wearing, and sealed the wall with drywall and joint compound. Then Hale had helped Lydia clean the blood from the basement floor. He'd taken Amber's bicycle and ridden it to the cemetery, leaving it by the fence to create the appearance of an abduction. He'd returned to the house, made sure Lydia understood the story they would tell, and left before dawn. The next morning, Lydia had called the sheriff to report her daughter missing, and for 24 years they had both lived with the lie. The trial began in November 2025. Lydia Whitlow was deemed unfit to stand trial due to her advancing dementia. She was placed in a state-run care facility, where she spent her days staring out the window, rarely speaking, her mind lost to the fog of memory and guilt. Reverend Thomas Hale was charged with accessory after the fact to manslaughter and obstruction of justice. His defense attorney argued that he had acted out of misguided compassion, that he had genuinely believed he was helping a woman in crisis. The prosecution countered that his actions had obstructed a criminal investigation, deprived Amber of a proper burial, and caused immeasurable suffering to the community. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witnesses testified about Amber's disappearance, the search efforts, the years of unanswered questions. Margaret Hale took the stand, tearfully stating that her husband had never told her what he'd done, that she'd lived with a stranger for over 2 decades without knowing it. On December 4, 2025, the jury returned a verdict, guilty on both counts. Hale was sentenced to 12 years in prison. He was 79 years old. As he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he turned to look at the gallery, where members of his former congregation sat in stunned silence. Some wept, others looked away. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I thought I was doing God's work, but I was wrong." The aftermath tore Willow Creek apart. First Baptist Church saw its attendance plummet. Many families left for other congregations, unable to reconcile the man they'd trusted with the truth of what he'd done. The new pastor, Reverend Daniel Cross, struggled to hold the community together, preaching sermons about forgiveness and redemption, but the damage was done. The Whitlow house was demolished in early 2026, the property sold to a developer who planned to build a small park in its place. A memorial plaque was installed, bearing Amber's name and the dates of her birth and death. Sheriff Angela Torres closed the case file on January 15, 2026. Her final report included a handwritten note. "Sometimes the hardest part of a lie is how long a town will live inside it." Sarah Mitchell, now in her early 40s, returned to Willow Creek for the memorial service held at the new park. She stood beside Amber's grave, which had been relocated from the basement to a proper cemetery plot, and placed a bouquet of magnolias on the headstone. "I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner," she whispered. "I'm sorry I stopped looking." Detective Jonas Mercer attended the service as well. He stood at the back of the crowd, watching as the townspeople filed past the grave, some leaving flowers, others simply standing in silence. When it was over, he drove back to Atlanta, the case file tucked into his briefcase, another name added to the long list of lives he'd tried to piece back together. And in a care facility 2 hours away, Lydia Whitlow sat by a window, staring out at the magnolia trees swaying in the spring breeze. She didn't remember much anymore. Not the trial, not the arrest, not even the night Amber died. But sometimes, late at night, she would wake up and call out for her daughter, her voice trembling in the darkness. "Amber, are you there? Amber, please come home." And the only answer was silence. Years later, long after the news cameras had left and the headlines had faded, Willow Creek remained a town divided. Some believed Reverend Hale had acted out of compassion, however misguided. Others saw him as a coward who had betrayed everything he claimed to stand for. The debate raged in coffee shops and church basements, at town council meetings and backyard barbecues. But one thing was certain: the secret that had been buried in the Whitlow basement for 24 years had changed the town forever. On quiet Sunday mornings, when the church bells rang across Willow Creek, fewer people answered their call. The pews that had once been filled with families now sat half empty, the hymns sung by voices that had lost their conviction. And in the small park where the Whitlow house once stood, magnolia blossoms drifted down like snow, covering Amber's memorial plaque in a blanket of white petals. The inscription read simply, "Amber Marie Whitlow, 1984-2001, gone but never forgotten." But for those who had lived through the lie, the words felt hollow, because in the end, Amber had been forgotten. She'd been hidden away, buried beneath concrete and silence, erased from the world by the two people who were supposed to protect her. And now, all that remained was the truth, cold, unforgiving, and too late to change anything. Detective Mercer kept a copy of the case file in his office, a reminder of the cost of secrets. Whenever a new cold case crossed his desk, he thought of Amber Whitlow, and he made a promise to himself: no more silence, no more lies. Every victim deserved the truth, no matter how long it took to find it. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of Willow Creek, where the magnolias bloomed and the cicadas sang their endless song, the memory of Amber Whitlow lingered, a ghost of a girl who never got to leave, never got to chase her dreams, never got to become the person she was meant to be, all because of one terrible moment, one irreversible mistake, and the silence that followed. The town would carry that weight forever, and the magnolias would keep on blooming year after year, beautiful and indifferent to the sorrow beneath their roots.